Welcome to one of the very best countries in which to live on planet Earth today. Now, you might expect that from the author of An Optimist's Guide to Ireland, but I'm here to prove it to you. And not just prove that to you, but to tell you what other countries can learn from our success. Now, let's get started. So, where might we turn to find out how Ireland is doing today? Maybe the media, the newspapers, RT, what would they say? No. Housing crisis has demoralised a generation. The medical service is in crisis. Dublin is abandoned by government. Ministers corrupted. Would the last young person to leave Ireland please turn out the lights? Yeah, doesn't sound like much of a good place to live. But our first lesson is don't look to the media to find out really how any country is doing. No, let's look a bit more objectively. Let's look comparatively. Let's look at how others evaluate our success. Let's turn to the United Nations. They've been tracking human development around the world since 1990, producing an annual index of countries. And they say Ireland is the 7th best country for quality of life today. In fact, Ireland has risen 22 places since they started assessing this in 1990, the greatest growth of any developed nation in that time. So wait a minute, what is it then that the UN are looking at? What are they assessing when they say this is a great place to live? Firstly, they're looking at lifespan. Do people live long and healthy lives in each of these countries? Well, in Ireland we do. The Irish live longer than ever before. Back in 1980, the average Irish person lived 72 years, not bad, but a couple of years less than the average American, the average British person. All countries extended their lifespan over the following decades. But by 2000, Ireland was exceeding the US in terms of our longevity. By 2010, exceeding the UK. Today, the average Irish person lives 83 years, 1 year longer than the average British person, 4 years longer than the average American. So we're living longer lives? Okay. But are they healthier? Well, the evidence says yes, at least in terms of our own self-appraisal. When asked, 80% of Irish people describe their health as good or very good. 80% is higher than any other EU country. So, first thing the UN is looking at, are the Irish people living long and healthy lives? The evidence is yes. Okay. The second thing they look at is education. Are people developed to fulfill their potential? Well, the Irish educational system actually is exceptional. Look at second level. The OECD tracks quality of reading, quality of mathematics, quality of science amongst teenagers in 81 countries around the world. The most recent ranking in reading, Irish teenagers were the second best in the world, only after Singapore. In science and maths, 11th and 12th. We've grown up 10 places up the rankings in the last decade alone. So the quality of our education system is truly exceptional. But also the quantity. If we turn not from second level, but to third level, the majority of adults of working age in Ireland have a third level qualification of some form, a diploma, a degree. It's higher than nearly any other country in the world. Japan and Canada, the two that beat Ireland. But the majority, we are one of only a handful of countries of which this is true, the majority of working age adults have a third level qualification. So both in terms of quality and quantity of education, yes, Ireland is exceptional. The third thing the UN looks at is quality of life, or standard of living, I should say. Ireland's GDP per capita, Ireland's wealth, stripping out inflation, looking back over a long period, has an extraordinary story to tell. This chart goes back 100 years, because it was 100 years ago that Ireland gained its independence from the UK in the early 1920s. And at that point, we were by far the poorer cousin. Ireland's wealth, on average, was about 60% that of the average British person, the country we'd just chosen to separate from. And is on average only 40% that of the American at that time. So the pavements really were paved with gold in New York and in Philadelphia at that time. For many decades, there wasn't much of a change. Wealth barely improved in Ireland at all, and even when it did, it didn't show any significant catch-up with those two other countries. All the way through, we saw some improvement in the 70s, some improvement in the 80s, but no catch-up. Not until the mid-90s. We experienced a period of extraordinary economic growth, yes, the Celtic Tiger it was called. By 2000, catching up with the UK in wealth per capita. By 2010, catching up with the US, and now exceeding the US. Now, people will say in Ireland, well, that's GDP, so that includes all those multinational activity. That includes the Microsofts and the LinkedIns and the TikToks and all their revenues that they're earning in Europe, and that's true. But anyone who says that hasn't been a benefit to the ordinary Irish person is mistaken. Look at the shape of that graph in the last 20, 30 years and compare it to employment in Ireland. This graph could have gone all the way back to 1920. In 1920, there were only 1.1 million people in jobs in Ireland, 1920s. And same in the 1930s, also the 1940s and the 1950s. People had to emigrate to get jobs. The 1960s, the same. 70s, 80s, early 90s, the same. There was no growth in employment at all. And then as we saw on the previous chart, that GDP takeoff, so we saw employment rise radically. In 16 years, we doubled the number of jobs that there was in Ireland. There was a recession, but we quickly regained. COVID, you can't even spot it. Now, 2.8 million people in employment in jobs. We're heading to triple the figure we had in the early 90s. Going back to that period in the early 90s, the majority of jobs were not high-skilled. High-skilled was the smallest share. Over that period, a lot of those jobs that have been created are high-skilled. Today, the biggest section of them fall into the high-skilled category, meaning that wealth for ordinary Irish people has increased very significantly. And as that wealth has increased, so we have done a better job of sharing it. Income inequality in Ireland has been declining and is actually at the lowest level it's ever been. The income inequality is measured on a scale from 100 to 0. 100, basically all the wealth will be owned by just one person. Everyone else will have nothing. The other extreme, 0, it means perfect equality. Absolutely everybody has exactly the same amount without any variation. So Ireland, as you can see, has been improving over that period. The figure we're now at, 27%, is equivalent to Denmark. It's more equal than the most European countries, more equal than France or Germany. It's way more equal than the UK, and it's way, way, way more equal than the US. So actually, again, when the UN looks across these things in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of standard of living, there's a great story to tell in Ireland comparatively. But it's not just that. It's not just the things they're looking at. What about freedom? Cultural freedom, personal freedoms, political freedoms, social freedoms, all rated by the Human Freedom Index. We're 4th in the world in our most recent assessment of freedom of life in Ireland. Social progress. We're now in the top 10 most socially progressive nations in the world, particularly called out for our human rights, for our inclusivity. Democracy. We're recently rated amongst the top 10 most democratic nations on the planet today. So we have many reasons to say that actually Ireland is a fantastic place to live at this point in time. We must all be thrilled with it. We must all be jumping out of beds in the morning and going, woohoo, what a place, we're so happy to live here. Yes, yes, we lead happy lives. That's what the evidence says. Since we joined the EU, we've been tracking life satisfaction. In other words, how satisfied are people with the lives they lead? And the most recent figures, just completed at the end of last year, 98% of Irish people say they are fairly or very satisfied with their lives. Half say very, half fairly. It's the highest figure it's ever been, and it's the highest figure in all of Europe, pipping the Danes and the Swedes into second place. So yeah, we do actually have a great place, and we do recognize the positives of life here. Now, it's not perfect. It's not a perfect place, and I'm not saying that it is, because there isn't any country that is. Just as we're a success, so people want to come here, of course they do. And that's putting pressure on our housing, of course. We don't have enough housing to cater for the needs that are there at the moment. Higher incomes, more people employment, more demand for goods pushes up prices. This is an expensive place to live. And that economic wealth over the last few decades was accompanied by a huge growth in our CO2 emissions as well. So per capita, we're one of the worst performing in Europe. So there are many things we have to fix, of course there are. But comparatively, objectively, this has been a place of immense positive progress. So why so? What has Ireland done right that others could imitate? Well, the blueprint for national well-being has essentially been uncovered by social scientists over the last 20 or 30 years. Big data sets now allow us to compare countries to each other in terms of quality of life and to be able to untangle the factors that account for them. This list of factors that are attributed with countries that have high levels of well-being and high levels of happiness also reads extraordinarily well as a list of what Ireland has delivered over the last 30 or 40 years. Economic development. We've seen that huge growth in the Irish economy. Globalization. We've achieved that by opening up our economy to attract foreign direct investment and the talent that we need to grow. Ireland competes with Netherlands every year to be crowned the most globalized country in the world. Level of democracy. We've seen it. People like democracies because they feel that their voice, of course, is heard. Ireland, one of the top 10 in the world. Rule of law, absence of corruption. People want to know that their life will be based on merit, not on who you know. And indeed, in corruption terms, Ireland is judged the 10th least corrupt nation in the world by Transparency International. Good governance, political stability. We have had strong political stability here. You'd have to say there's evidence of good governance too. I'll come back to that, but we haven't seen the extremes shifts to left and right. We have had strong policy stability over the last few years that has meant we've continued to invest in education, FDI, and so on. A progressive tax regime. It's one of the reasons that our income inequality is declining. Ireland has a very progressive tax regime. We tax people at a high rate fairly quickly, and the more they earn, the more they pay. And the government uses that to redistribute wealth to provide adequate income security for those that need it. Ireland does well on this criteria. A good healthcare system. You have to say we do. We live amongst the longest of anywhere in the world. In fact, just 2 years less than the world's longest livers, the Japanese. A healthy natural environment. Slightly trickier one for others to copy, perhaps, given our geography is a good bit of our wealth in that respect. But again, Ireland does well here. High levels of trust and community. 3/4 of Irish people say that most others can be trusted in this country. That's higher than nearly anywhere else in Europe. We have a strong sense of community in ourselves. Personal political freedom, we've talked about that, being one of the top 4 in the world in this respect. So overall, you can see how all these factors that social scientists are saying are what distinguish the most happiest countries in the world are the very ones that Ireland has had such success on. And it provides a blueprint for other countries to follow. But you do have to say that this list didn't exist 30 years ago. It wasn't as though the Irish government sat down and went, right, let's start on number 1 and work our way down. That wasn't how it was. But I suggest that there were 4 factors that allowed and enabled Ireland to achieve this success, that made Ireland open to that blueprint. And these can also be imitated and provide lessons for other countries around the world. 4 factors that I suggest have helped our little plant, our shamrock, grow over the last few decades. Number 1, stability. Ireland is a very stable nation. In fact, we're only one of a dozen countries that have been a democracy unbroken for more than a century. Governments have followed consistent and stable policies in terms of economic development, in terms of educational investment. We haven't seen the political swings to the far left or the far right. That stability has allowed the development of institutional capital, strong institutional capital in the state. Second thing, community. I talked about it. We have a strong sense of community. We have a strong sense of trust for others. And that's meant that fairness is a very important part of our political discourse. As the economic wealth has grown, so people have ensured, policymakers have ensured, that those who need support the most have got it. Income inequality has decreased. Fairness is part of our political narrative because social capital is strong and we've invested in it. Those things, to me, they were the bedrock on which, or the soil, I suppose, on which Ireland's flower developed. But it was superpowered by investment in education. In other words, by investment in human capital. That quality, that quantity of education I talked about earlier meant that we were all in a position to contribute in some way to this national development. And to me, that's been supercharged by openness, by the fact that we were open to bringing in the investment we needed and the people we needed to develop, and we're open to trading with the world and being a base for trading with the world. These 4 factors, to me, are the very things that other countries can invest in if they wish to emulate some of Ireland's success. we find ourselves, in truth, at a magical time. At a time, in truth, when we've had enormous development over the last few years. Remarkable, outstanding, despite what the media says. And why the media aren't reporting that will have to be the subject of my next TED Talk. But we have never been healthier. As a country, we've never been wealthier. We've never been better educated. We actually have never been happier. The blueprint that Ireland has stumbled across, that blueprint for well-being, is something that other countries can seek to emulate too. So what the world needs right now, ladies and gentlemen, is a bit more Ireland. Investing in people, investing in society, investing in institutions, investing in openness is a magic formula to help places thrive that other countries can learn from. And you can play your part by asking your political leaders, wherever they may be, to invest in this to help their country emulate Ireland's success. The legacy of Ireland now can be the future for you. Thank you for your time.